Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. The UK government's Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, Nadine Dorries, put the future of public service broadcasting into doubt with an announcement that the licence fee would be frozen for the next 2 years. What would a change in funding mean for public service broadcasting in Wales, particularly for the Welsh language? Tonight we discuss the future of public broadcasting and whether we should take these threats seriously. Joining us is Bethan Syed, former chair of the Senate Culture, Welsh Language and Communications Committee. Hello, Bethan.
Hello, Shmai.
Right. And we've got Tim Hartley, author and former director of corporate affairs at S4C. Hello, Tim.
Hello there. Good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. So let's talk about first the politics of this announcement. Bethan, why do you think this is the direction of travel for the UK government in relation to public service broadcasting?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily something new. I just think it's been rehashed because of circumstances around the unpopularity of the government and their shenanigans right now that this has reappeared. I think it's always been the Conservative government's aim to demarketise, to make sure that they can try and create more commerciality in the broadcasting media sector. And this is just clarifying that. And so everybody's been saying in Wales, well, it's amazing because S4C has had £7.5 million extra, but this isn't as much as what they had in 2010. We all know that. So I do agree with Richard Wyn-Jones, who said this was the institutional equivalent of a human shield for the UK government, because if they say, on one hand, we want to attack the BBC, but then say, oh, S4C, we're giving them more money, then perhaps campaigners and those in Wales will stay a little quieter when BBC is decimated. But we all know that S4C gets a large amount of money from BBC, so it's not all roses in the garden. So I think this isn't new, but it's something that we should be concerned about.
Tim, what was your take on the announcement?
Well, it's nothing new, is it? I mean, there have been strands within the Tory party and beyond that, actually, who have always felt that the licence fee was an unjust tax. You have no choice about it. It's a single rate. It's not a progressive tax in any way. And politically, I've always felt that there's been a left-wing bias in the BBC. John Whittingdale, when he was Secretary of State and then as chair of the House of Commons Select Committee on Culture, Media and Sport, was always a keen aggressor to the BBC. So this is nothing new, but Bethan's right to put a finger on it, why it's raised its ugly head yet again, and in such a dramatic and forceful fashion from the current Secretary of State, is in a sense to sort of to throw red meat, I think is what they said, to the Tory backbenchers. So you've got your hardline Tories who say, look, this is not a free market. This is state subsidy and it's state radio and television, which it's not. It's a public service broadcaster. Let's do away with it. And it's a lot of sabre rattling. I think there will be another licence fee come the end of the day. But this does look very good. It's the kind of thing that the Tories want to be heard in their constituencies and on the back benches. It is still, though, worrying.
And what was your assessment of the reaction to the announcement? There was almost an immediate backtracking from the language of Nadine Dorries' initial tweet about it, wasn't it? It almost seems like at some point between her tweeting and her making the statement to the Commons, there was a softening of the language.
I just wonder if she'd got her headlines, she'd done the job with it, you know. It's all over the newspapers, you know, bang, there we go. It's a distraction technique for 24 hours. Actually, it lasted a bit longer than 24 hours. And I think maybe people say, whoa, we've been down this path before. Actually, some people do like public service broadcasting. So yes, it was a distraction and I think it worked. But I still think, you know, even the freeze is going to make a big difference to the BBC centrally. When we can talk about their cost base, their talent costs, and, you know, the inherent inefficiency that I've seen there. But let's not think that a £7.5 million to S4C is solidly good news, because if there's a cut to the BBC licence fee or inflation is eroding it at 5.1% a year, S4C has, since it's been funded by the BBC, taken a similar hit to other BBC services, which, as Bethan quite rightly points out, is unjust because of the massive 36% cut, which was inflicted by Her Majesty's government before they handed the whole shebang over to be run by the BBC.
Bethan, do you think the reaction to the announcements does show the public support for public service broadcasting, though? Do you think that this was basically an announcement to satisfy the Conservative Party membership rather than the public at large?
It was to an extent, but I think that for me, now I'm outside of politics, it's also a reflection of the anger that people feel towards Boris Johnson's government. And so it was at a time when people were already annoyed with some of the happenings at Number 10. And then everybody saw through it pretty fast. And I think that's why you saw the backtracking, because they knew that the BBC was being used as a pawn in a very bad way. And yeah, I mean, there are lots of popular programs on the BBC, and it's not just, as Tim said, one channel. You know, we've gone beyond that. There's so many different services. And the BBC are reintroducing some, such as BBC Three. You know, they've reinvested, thinking they were going to be having perhaps a nicer time now, but then only to see that that may not be the case. And what really annoys me about this particular minister is it doesn't seem to me that she fully understands the landscape. You know, there's no point saying I want to have a conversation if she doesn't at least present some sort of an idea of what she wants to achieve, because she says she doesn't want subscription. Well, what does she want? She says she wants S4C to come up with a formula. I suppose that's one thing I would agree with, because when I was chairing the committee, I would ask S4C, what does more money mean? What does a substantial increase look like to you? And I think sometimes the onus has to go back onto the industries themselves to say, well, how can we change? How can we evolve to hold ourselves responsible?
Bethan, you mentioned Richard Wyn-Jones earlier on, and just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit about what he said about why would broadcasting in Wales be particularly negatively affected if BBC budgets were shrunk?
Well, because as Tim has said earlier, budgets have been cut for many years in Wales, and we rely heavily on public service broadcasting in Wales more than other parts of the UK. And so then that would affect the creative industries, the small independent companies. I was reading today that the UK government wants the BBC to be able to sell their programming and rights abroad. Well, we know that the independent companies hold those rights, don't we? So it won't be within the gift of the BBC to go willy-nilly to Canada, to Norway and such to sell those rights. That's just not going to be able to happen. And in Wales, we know that it's a complex situation as well, with newspapers having closed down, hyperlocals and podcasts like yourselves starting up as a way to fill that vacuum. And so if there are more cuts to the BBC, then we will see less drama again, we'll see less sport again, and we'll see less portrayal of everyday people on our screens, which is something when I was chair we were fighting against. So we will see that progress going, definitely.
Tim, I don't know if you wanted to expand a little on that. I know you touched on it before, but I think the point about the hit on the wider creative industries is really good. Would you like?
Well, if you look at S4C specifically and the BBC to a lesser extent in Wales, you're looking at more than £100 million of investment. Now, that's got a multiplier effect, you know. It's the double duty dollar, as the Americans would call it, that you're spending this money on television programs. Not only is that money then being spent in the economy, but you're also developing this talent base. And it's you know, you look at, I think it's Da Vinci's Demons, Doctor Who, you know, all these programs which have come out of Wales, and the talent base was here. Now, if that's going to be eroded or cut back, they're just going to drive those trucks back up to London or to the home counties. And you do need quotas, as they set on BBC production outside the M25, as Channel 4 have done as well. It's that which is going to be lost, as well as, to my mind, more importantly, Indigenous programme making. People from Wales talking about Wales to the people of Wales. It's not just news and current affairs. The fact that you have fewer drama series in the English and Welsh language, you know, even down to quiz shows and topical shows and formatted things, we're talking to ourselves. And it is more important in the Welsh context. First of all, because of the devolution deficit, that is, 85% of the people of Wales receive their news from sources outside Wales, such as newspapers and your radio and television. So it's doubly important. You know, if you go up to the borders outside Wrexham, say, for example, you know, people won't even know about the health minister in Wales. COVID has helped a little bit, but generally speaking, we need these services even more so than someone in the north or the south of England.
Tim, you did a really good article in the National on this whole issue, and in particular, you know, what it means for the future of S4C. We just explored there the creative industries, but Are there any other particular points specifically on S4C and the importance of that station and all it does in the Welsh language, which we should really try and highlight here?
Well, it is interesting. I've had a range of critiques of that article. One of them on Twitter, which said, that Welsh speakers are already spoiled, that it's exclusive, that they're building an empire for themselves. Absolute rubbish. When I was there, more than 30% of the viewers of S4C's main channel were non-Welsh speakers. My sister-in-law in Talbot loves Pobl y Cwm with subtitles. You want to watch the Welsh Premier League? S4C is the only channel which puts it on with an English language commentary paid for by commercial monies, not public monies. So S4C is much bigger than just a range of services. You look at the stuff they're doing online for young people, kids who see Welsh as a school subject. And outside, they can have a laugh through Hanch or Gareth, the orangutan from North Wales. You look at the educational programs they do, the Welsh learners services which they offer, all that kids stuff in the morning. And when people go on about zero viewing figures, they don't understand that they don't record children under the age of 4 who are the target audience of those programs. So what S4C does and what it means to people who speak Welsh or not is far more, and it has a far greater reach than perhaps even BBC Wales does within Wales.
Beth, what do you think the impact on the Welsh language would be should we lose those kind of services such as S4C and Radio Cymru?
Obviously we don't want any more cuts because we've seen, as I said earlier, and as Tim has outlined, diminution of many of the programmes that we've grown up with. And I think that also in terms of reaching the million, and when I was chairing the committee, I also chaired the committee in relation to the Welsh language. At that point, S4C was saying, well, we want to be part of the conversation to provide more tools and programming to help the Welsh Government reach that aim. Well, if there's going to be cutbacks, can S4C do that? Can BBC Radio Cymru, BBC Cymru View, can they perform that public service role as well, which is to educate the nation to an extent? So, and also we've got to think about the fight that it's been for so many years to even get to this stage in our development. People were climbing pylons in the 70s and 80s to try and get to a situation where we had our own channel, where we had our own broadcast, and now we have to have the debate, do we not, about evolving broadcasting, because we cannot simply leave the decision to Conservatives in Westminster who simply do not care about the future of our nation. That's where I sit right now.
Don't worry, we will get back to the devolution of broadcasting very, very soon. Looking at the funding model then for S4C, it's questionable as to whether a channel like S4C could survive without public funding. As Tim put in his article, I believe, it is the definition of public service broadcasting in Wales. Is there a way in which a channel like S4C could be future-proofed in terms of funding, into maybe, looking at commercial models, or must it be publicly funded, Tim?
I think what I said in that article was that it was the product of market failure. There simply aren't enough Welsh speakers who could pay enough to make it work. This idea that you can just Netflixize Welsh language broadcasting is absolute nonsense. You can sell a few programs here and there, or you can sell the Ferm Factor formats to China. But as Beth Ann says, that money goes back into Cwmni Da. Doesn't go back into S4C. So it's pie in the sky to think that we can even start to think about that. So what do we do then in terms of public money? If the BBC has money and it has responsibility for S4C, someone has got to say, this is not just any old BBC service, it's special and should be protected. And one of the last things I did there was try to get S4C on the face of the Public Bodies Act. This sounds a bit boring, but bear with me on it. The most important thing was that we had written into there that the Secretary of State for Culture has responsibility to ensure adequate funding for S4C. Now, I think S4C have pulled a blinder with the 7.5 million for digital services. The only reason I think that they were able to do that and get the Secretary of State, think about it now, to dictate to the BBC, you are spending £7.5 million on this particular service. Now, you could rewrite that as state interference, but I think that's very important. So what I'm saying is that the government has recognised in that act that they do have a responsibility to ensure proper funding for S4C. The debate then moves to, where does that money come from? If we're writing off subscription, and there may be services on the fringes, say the football, for example, or the rugby podcasts or whatever, but you guys will know podcasts don't make money. There may be other streams of income which could, fill the central coffers, but we need to be very creative about that. And interestingly, at the same time as the Secretary of State in England was making these decisions on S4C, or making the statements, it was then the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, who said, and this makes the argument for devolving broadcasting even stronger. Now, my answer to that is, Professor Drakeford, put your money where your mouth is. And I've changed a little bit on this, whereas I used to think that UK government funding, because of what a big bank balance they've got, okay, they're borrowing, but so what? It was quite safe, that funding, because they didn't want to get back to a Thatcherite issue of people climbing masts and destroying constituency offices in the name of the Welsh language and Welsh broadcasting. Okay, so if they're not going to do it, who is going to do it? And if you talk about broadcasting, this particular element of broadcasting, if you're devolving it, who should have responsibility for funding it? And I think the Welsh government needs to think very clearly, very hard about what it's saying, about what it actually means in practice.
Well, yeah, this comes down to, if the Welsh government has changed its mind on the devolution of broadcasting, then they have to put some work into that. The department within the Welsh government, when I was there only a year ago, was very small in dealing with broadcasting issues. And so I didn't feel that they invested a lot of time in putting a strategy in place about what they would want to see a future devolved broadcasting Wales to look like. We attempted to put some meat on the bone of that as a committee, but it's very, very difficult when you haven't actually got the main players around the table. And I would probably disagree with Tim to an extent about S4C playing a blinder, because I think that they probably did for themselves, but I don't think that that's really helped the wider discussion over broadcasting in Wales, because it seems a bit protectionist. Oh, S4C, we've got 7.5 million, so we're okay. But what about the rest? What about how things work for the future? What about the fact that money that used to be from the DCMS has gone into the licence fee? Will they see that money in future? We don't know what's going to happen past 2027, for example. So we have to get the key players around the table to say, right, what would you want a system to look like if there was no other choice but to have devolution? Because our committee could only agree on devolving Welsh language broadcasting, whereas, of course, people like myself and others would go further and say, well, we have to look at the whole balance of things and have our own individual Ofcom for Wales as well. It wouldn't necessarily have to be Ofcom, it could be a new regulator. And we would also try and look at how hyperlocals are funded through Google, through these big corporations. So I think people are too scared still to actually put the detail on things, when we can talk and talk and talk about strategies, but what do you want to see happening? And tell us what that looks like, please, First Minister. Or Prime Minister, as he called himself.
I think S4C is a good place to start, though, Beth, and I hear what you say, that it might be selfish to think of it in isolation. If you could crack the ice with that, you might be getting somewhere. In terms of devolving broadcasting, you and I had the discussion, I think it might have even been an argument some years ago, before you were a committee chair, that what do you mean? The balkanization of the BBC, I think the term was. I don't get this from the Tories. The BBC is one of the most British unifying things we've got. Think state funerals, think Olympics and World Cups, think the Dimblebys and all that kind of stuff. So I don't get that on a cultural level, because I'm a great believer in the BBC. However, what do you do then if you split 6%, say population-wise, of the licence sphere, and you say to the Welsh government, here we go, you run it. All right, what do we do then? Well, you've got to buy EastEnders, mate. Oh, really? Yeah. And you've got to buy that World Cup coverage. Okay. How much is left for Welsh programmes? Up to you, mate. And this is the danger. And I would, I'd be really like someone to help me with that, because I think that's difficult. I agree with you. It's not a whole picture going on and on about S4C. And I hated the way, discussion of broadcasting always goes down to S4C, S4C is important, yeah, but it's not the whole picture. But I really would be interested in just some ideas of how you could do the rest. I mean, ITV, very clever, extending their news programme to an hour, the very week that the BBC is getting a real kick in the stomach. How clever to say, we're a public service broadcaster. We don't cost you a penny except for due prominence on the electronic programme guide. Really good stuff. So I would be interested in what you can do with the rest, whether it's feasible with public service broadcasting in the commercial setting, whether Channel 4 should be doing more. I think they do a lot of good stuff from Wales, usually mentioning it. My sister in Ireland says, "God, why is Channel 4 obsessed? Channel 4 News obsessed with Wales?" I think it's good fun. But the BBC, I think, does pose a much bigger problem in terms of how you would actually devolve that.
You're going to hate me now, Tim, because I'm going to go straight back to SLC. But we've talked so much about the 7.5 million that's gone into SLC's digital platforms. Is this enough to revolutionize their product, or is it just about keeping them in the game, keeping them up to scratch with other providers that we are all so accustomed to now?
I think it was clearly ring-fenced the digital services and the platforms, wasn't it? So that was their argument, that we need to compete in the digital world. What does that mean? Does it mean more bite-sized stuff? Does it mean more education, more young people stuff? I do hope so, because that's the way to attract them and to keep them. They got this problem with the Welsh language that, when kids leave school at 16 or 17 or 18, they forget it. It's not cool. And even when you're in school, it's a bit crap, really, isn't it? It's a school lesson. So you need to get something a little bit more sexy, a little bit more digital, a little bit smaller size, YouTube-ish to do it. So is that 7.5 million a fig leaf? And what about old men like me now who still want to watch high-quality drama on a Sunday night? The scripts are good, the acting's good, the sets are poor, there are no night scenes, there are few crowd scenes, you don't get many stunts. Talk to my friends who work with Pobl y Cwm, the budgets are so small, they've even cut back the number of episodes. And I think that's down to money as well. So, it's not really enough. Betha made the point, 7.5 million, when you've taken like 30-something million from them years ago. So yeah, I'm really hopeful for the digital stuff, but let's not forget people over the age of 25 as well.
Can I just say as well, when I was chair, we had SLC in quite a lot to give evidence, and they would say to us, well, we've actually spent our current budgets on digital, even though our remit doesn't actually qualify for us to use it in that way. So to be devil's advocate, they probably overspent on other budgets on digital, and this is to supplement what they have already spent in that area. So, I mean, yes, it's being portrayed as new money, but they are doing things digitally. They want to expand on that because the youth element is still something they struggle with, but not because they're not trying, but again, as Tim said, because the finances haven't been there.
I'm longing for a day when they put the back catalogue of Cardiff on Click. As long as I get that, I'm pretty happy. But it's been put to me that part of the problem with SLC is it doesn't necessarily provide the volume of and variety of programming that modern consumers feel should be customary in a channel or a streaming service, if you look at how most people consume their media nowadays. Do you think that is almost more of an existential threat to the service than its funding formula, that perhaps the demand isn't there because people can so easily go on to their streaming services for, as the flashy TV dramas with lots of night scenes?
Well, I think you've got to look at S4C like going into a restaurant. You pick up an a la carte menu. You're not having everything on the menu. You pick and choose. Bethan may be a vegetarian. Matthew may like pasta. I might be a meat and two veg man. It's got to be all things to all men, and that is difficult. Having said that, isn't that exactly what we have now? When I watch on catch-up almost every time, high-class drama, it's usually on personal recommendation. When I watched Enid and Lucy on an S4C, it's because I saw it trailed and people were praising it on Twitter. It is a pick and mix now. The lucky thing for the BBC is they seem to have enough platforms and enough channels that you can go there. I mean, BBC Three was the one I really enjoyed. It wasn't aimed at me, but Family Guy was a staple. wasn't even British made, for goodness sake. And it's a bit extravagant, isn't it, to have a channel where you can experiment, I think they said. S4C doesn't have that option. So, am I switching in on at 7 o'clock and leaving it on until midnight? I'm not. Some people do, though. Some people do that because they're more comfortable listening to stuff in Welsh, even stuff they're not interested in. Will I watch Noson Lawen? No. I'll watch the football? Yeah. Is there a comedy on there? Give me some stand-up. Give me Tudur Owen. Yeah, I will actually make that appointment viewing or catch it on catch-up. So I'm not sure whether I agree with the basis of your question, to be honest with you, because I don't think any of us actually watch a whole channel all the time, and it serves us all.
Bethan, isn't that a bit of the problem, though? It's the sort of catch-22 nature of how we consume media. You kind of want more variety, but you've got to then also understand the market factors at play. You can't have everything you want from one place.
And it is, I know we've talked about radio and Cymru View, but it is one place in terms of a channel, is it not? Other countries would have more than one channel to serve their populations, public service or not. And, Netflix has driven up the cost of drama by 30%. How are they going to be able to compete when, S4C are only just announcing that they're making a film for the first time in so many years? So, we have to cut them some slack in that regard. And I think, as Welsh speakers and people who are involved in the discussion, we will understand, but it's attracting, like Tim said, people who, don't necessarily speak Welsh, but we want them to get onto the channel. We still have the purists who don't want to have, the English and Welsh juxtaposed on any programs, even though that's the reality we live in. We've got to think to the future as well about the fact that it has to diversify and how that then looks in the future. And I mean, not just in the people on the screens, but the quality and the type of programming that it offers. Just because we've had Pobl Cwm there for the last 40 years doesn't mean that it has to be there for the next 40 years. There's a protectionism in Wales. People won't like me saying it, but I have to, I think, because that might leave space for something new to come through, because there is only so much money in the pot. It can only go so far. So perhaps that does have to be part of the conversation. Yes, I might be a vegetarian, but I might want to have tofu one night, and I might want to have, a veggie burger the other night. So, that's the type of discussion I think we have to have when the budgets are shrinking.
I think we should talk about cookery programs the way this thing's going. But what extent do you think that the UK government is thinking about things wider than what we've talked about so far? So BBC Radio and regional news in their plans?
Well, again, it comes back to the first answer that I gave. I mean, there was already, cuts. I was looking before I came here tonight, £80 million savings were made before. And news in Wales has been cut on many levels. So this isn't a new conversation in terms of cuts. It will just mean that there will be more of it. And that means then we will be in an even bigger democratic deficit. And this is so many years after devolution. I mean, it's criminal in a way. We've become a Senedd, and yet we may see even more cutbacks to the very journalistic quality that we need to see progressing here in Wales. No, we can't rely solely on the BBC. Yes, we have to look at other channels, ITV and such. But, please, this is the cornerstone, isn't it? Is it not? We've really got to look at that. So, whatever the Welsh government does is going to be small fry in comparison. The journalistic fund that I campaigned for and got from Welsh government is small. That's not going to do very much. Golwg 360, that's a small budget. So we must be worried about the journalism potential cuts to journalism. They haven't announced anything, so I don't want to scaremonger, but if you're going to see real-term cuts, you're going to probably see that happen in the newsrooms as well.
I think there is a danger that the BBC does pick off the easiest things like regional and television and local radio. I spent 2.5 very happy years around the regions of England as a radio reporter. And you'd be amazed at the gratitude people have and the relationship they have with their local radio station. I was at BBC Radio Manchester, big city radios, and BBC Radio Bristol. And they'd go on to BBC Solent out of Southampton, or Radio Bedfordshire. And it serves a really important audience, and it costs next to nothing to run these radio stations. And I'd hate to think that was being lost. I remember many years ago, Hugh Edwards on a podium in Aberystwyth with the Celtic Film Festivals, and a guy from Cornwall saying, it's not fair. We don't have any money to make television programs in Cornwall. And Hugh just said, you want to get yourself some devolution, mate. And I just thought it was a really good answer. And while we're wringing our hands, gnashing our teeth at all this, at the moment, we're in a fairly good situation compared with the regions of England. And there are places with great regional identity, you think Yorkshire, the Northwest around Manchester and Liverpool, that have got some good programming coming out of them. ITV is spending tens of millions on their regional news services. Big mistake that Ofcom allowed them to cut back their news and regional current affairs. But I think, celebrating the English regions as well, and Scotland have got a different ecology too. I think it's really important, and I'd hate for those to go because they're easy to get rid of, If you want, I can go through, it's not my job, where perhaps the BBC is super serving people, What on earth is Radio 3 for example? Why have we got BBC 2 and BBC 4? Are they not the same thing? And they've got a cost. Again, BBC 3 on moving back from online onto terrestrial television. Never mind the talent costs at the top there. There is no market for speech radio journalists. Let's be brutally honest. If they want to go to LBC, they go. If they don't, they're at the BBC. Your choice. But, there are ways of making programs cheaper. You could lose some services. To impose a 5% blanket cut every year on every program, I think would be disastrous as well. But maybe we just need to rethink, as Beth Ann said, in the Welsh context, what we actually want and how we pay for it,
One of the interesting things I've heard this week, and I haven't formulated this question that well, but you might have come across it in the committee work and Tim in your wider media work. But I heard a really good, really articulate argument by obviously someone in the commercial media sector in the UK who was saying he thinks that anything along these lines to commercialise the BBC will actually hit negatively the commercial sector. There's not a huge demand from those funded by advertisement to lose advert revenue to what could be an advertising seeking BBC. Have either of you looked at that at all? Do you think that will hit the commercial sector in any way?
Well, there's only one cake, isn't there, of advertising money. All you're talking about is cutting it in a different way. And if you cut it in a way for the BBC, then your ITVs of this world and Channel 4 and your Sky services are going to have less, aren't they? So there's not going to be more money just because you commercialise the BBC's elements of it. So I think that would be a mistake, whether or not they can promote more programme sales and format sales. That's what BBC Worldwide is there to do, and they do make a profit, and they do great stuff in BBC Studios as well. I'm not a stick in the mud and say you can't commercialise anything, but I think that specific point that you made there, I go back to this business. There is a finite amount of advertising money to be had, and all you're doing is splitting it in different ways.
Beth, and when you would chair the committee, did they look at the commercial side of broadcasting in Wales and how that might be impacted in anything that we do?
We didn't look at, the intricacies of if, BBC wasn't funded by the licence fee, and if it was funded by advertising or subscription, what would that look like? We didn't do that. What we did look at more was the intellectual properties, as I talked about earlier, because I think that's a really, interesting point, only because Nadine Dorries has made such a big thing of it as to her concept of what could work is for BBC to make revenue that way. Yes, the independent companies will be able to bring money back into the economy locally, but it's not going to go into the pot for the BBC. So, how then are the BBC going to be able to make that money? if they're going to be splitting costs for advertising, that's not going to be realistic. So we didn't look at that element in detail, but we certainly looked at, talking to TAC and others about, how they felt they could do more in terms of selling what they have. But, again, you've got to be making different types of programs so that they're attractive to the international market, and thinking creatively about how you do that. Bang has now been sold to America, but that's taken time, because I know the man who made the program. So it's not something you can just click and sell overnight, like Nadine Dorries seems to be suggesting. It takes a lot of work to get these negotiations correct and to make them work. So I don't know if she really understands what's happening, to be honest.
There are models of public service broadcasters which have got a licence fee and advertising. RTE has got it. And I don't think that's a problem. The trouble then, of course, is you're having this same argument in 10 or 20 years' time. They said, well, you've got some advertising, let's take away the licence fee because it is unjust, or because we don't like your journalism. So, these are the kind of hard decisions we've got to make. I remember Bethan in one of our meetings when you were a backbencher, Rodri Williams, who is now chair of S4C, said, look, if you want to increase S4C's budget, there's one really simple way of doing it. You bring all the production back in-house, you save 15% on the management fee, on the profit that the independent companies are taking. It'll never happen. Because, we want the 100 flowers to bloom from the different production companies. And also because you want a vibrant industry which is making money, not just from S4C, but from other commercial partners too. So if you look at the sacred cows, advertising on the BBC, taking production back in-house and doing away with quotas for independent companies, maybe we just need to look at smashing some of these sacred cows.
One of the things you've both mentioned is Welsh Government and funding that's available. Do you think, should this go in the worst possible direction in Wales, and we're looking at a very different policy approach from the two governments, do you think that there is a likelihood of Welsh Government putting significantly more money in to make sure what we have is continued, or do you think that's beyond what they'd be able to do?
Well, I don't think they're going to be putting money into the BBC in any realistic way unless they had funding that would be devolved to Wales to see that happening. But I think they can do it in different ways. As I've said earlier about the hyperlocals, money has gone into that, but it was 100,000 in 1 year, another 100,000 in the next year. I'm not sure what's happening with that now that I'm out of the political domain. And obviously they are in talks with S4C about what they do in terms of the million speakers, but that's more to do with what type of programming would help in that regard. They can't mandate S4C to do anything that would achieve that policy aim. It would be S4C coming to the table saying, yes, we can do that. And then money that they give to people like the Welsh Books Council and such for online websites like Golwg 360. Can they be more creative within their department to think what more can we fund? Can we talk to the Googles of this world to see if we can get some revenue from them to fund local journalism, for example? What more can we do there? So that's where I think that they can work harder, but that's only if there's a will. We had to fight for that fund to even exist. So now that Mark Drakeford has said that, well, let's hope the committee under Derek Jewell's chairmanship and the Welsh Government, now that they're in talks with Plaid Cymru as well, can come up with some clear, new, creative plans that can go some way to perhaps more devolution to the back door, should I say. Unionists don't like that.
What, if anything, can the Welsh Government do to safeguard Welsh media then? We've talked about devolving broadcasting as something that's possibly beyond their power at the moment. Devolution through the back door, maybe viable, as Bethan said, but what can the Welsh Government do that's within their power to really safeguard the future of Welsh media?
Well, I think Bethan's put a finger on something very important there. We're still talking about channels and programmes rather than services. and the like, and that maybe hyperlocal, this kind of stuff, we're moving away from the old traditional forms of viewing and consuming media to different ones. And in that sense, they could have an element of control without interference. The S4C thing, I think the BBC, they're not going to pay for the BBC anytime soon. If S4C is 100 million a year, maybe with arm's length to ensure that there's due impartiality and nobody's, sort of dictating the state of play, maybe they should put their money where their mouth is, especially if after 2027, the license fee is no more, or the BBC is given free rein over S4C funding and say, we just haven't got it anymore. You're going to have to be an opt-out service. We may want to go back to putting Channel 4 programmes on during the day. What a disaster that would be for the Welsh language and for Welsh services. But there may be more creative ways of doing it, I think the Welsh government, this is what gets me, that they say it's made the argument more so. Well, where is this discussion? People like Bethan have been pushing it, the argument. Let's have the discussion. Let's decide what we want. What can we do? But for goodness sake, let's pay for some of it ourselves, except for taking the begging bowl, up the M4 every damn time we want something.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for both of you coming on tonight to talk to us. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you on Twitter? Bethan?
At Bethan Jenkins on Twitter, I am.
Wonderful. And Tim?
At Tim H. Hartley on Twitter, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to talk to me, I'm Tim Hartley. If not, I'm Tim Hartley Author, and there's bits and pieces about books on there, which is a bit of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for coming to talk to us. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard this evening, please don't forget to find us on Twitter and Facebook at Hiraeth Pod. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.